Joey, am I the only judge this round, or are we waiting on some other? Ah, got it. Okay.
All right, everyone can hear me, right? Okay. So basically, for procedures, this tournament is basically going to be following a mix of ICDA and NSDA, meaning that we're going to be following ICDA rules when it comes to like direct questioning, which means that like after every speech, we're going to have 2 minutes of direct questioning, and that's going to be two blocks of 1 minute each. And so during that time, like since it's a 1 minute block, at the end of the 1 minute block, I'm just going to be muting everyone. I'm not going to be like waiting to call the next person. I'm just going to mute, and then I'm going to go on to the next questioner. And then for timing for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold up a C at 30 seconds. At 40 seconds, I'm going to have this card right here for 40 seconds. And then I have a stop card that's right here. I'm going to hold up that stop card and I'm going to mute you at the same time and then call the next questioner. Unlike NSDA, the first cycle and every other cycle has the same time for questioning. And then for speeches, I'm going to have the same, I'm going to have a 2 minute card, 2:30 card, 2:55 card, and then I'm going to hold up the stop card at 3 minutes. Technically, you only have a 5 second grace period, but I'm going to let you go on until 3:15 before I mute you. But I do want the judge to take into consideration that the grace period is really only 3 minutes, 5 seconds. And then when it comes to choosing speakers, it goes randomness. No, it goes precedency, recency, precedence, recency, randomness. And then for questioners, we're only taking into consideration precedence. There's no recency for questioning in ICDA, so it's really just precedence when it comes to questions. Any questions on any of the procedures or how the round's gonna run? Yeah, Nathan.
Hi, Mr. Speaker. So, what if, due to technical difficulties, our camera cuts off during a speech?
If your camera cuts off during a speech, I'm not going to be adjusting the time because it depends on who it cuts off for and everything. But what I will do is that after your speech is over, before questioning, I'll say, I'll explain that, like, I'll say that I heard a cutoff from X time to X time, and then you can give like a 5 seconds to just reiterate what you said there if necessary. But if no one else heard the cutoff, then I don't think it really matters. And then in the case that I'm cutting off, and you can't see my time signals, I encourage everyone in this round to like have a timer next to them, just in the case of technical difficulties and stuff like that. And then also one thing I forgot to mention is for the cycles, there is no breaking the app next cycle. So if someone doesn't have if there's like no app speech or next speech when it's supposed to be, we can do one of two things, either previous question or move to a recess until someone can write that speech. So yeah, that should be it. Any other questions? No? Okay, Aston?
I was just wondering because I have another commitment at 2:30, so I was wondering if I would like get docked for personal privileging my way out.
No, you wouldn't. And
Great,
oh yeah,
thank you.
personal privileges. You can either message me like privately in the Zoom chat, or you can just turn off your camera and leave with like whenever you want. Keep in mind though, whenever you turn off your camera, even if it's not for personal privileges, the judges are like supposed to supposed to keep in mind that when your camera is off, they're supposed to act like you're not even there. Okay, so keep your camera on when you're there, and then when you're going to personal privilege, you can either message me in the chat or just wait until after speech, turn off your camera, mute yourself, and leave. Okay.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
And that should be it. Judges, would the judges like to give any paradigms or just how they're going to be ranking this round? Anything like they want the competitors to keep in mind?
Sure. Hi guys, I'm Sarah Rosen. I'm a recent high school graduate, so I was competing not too long ago. If you're competing at this level, I expect that you kind of know the gist of things. good sources, high quality refutations where you're calling people out by name. Your arguments should make sense in the context of the debate. But I think the one thing you should keep in mind is, especially if you're not super familiar with the online tournament kind of situation, is that because we're not able to see you in person, it's harder to gauge how passionate you are about what you're talking about. So making sure that you're being even more emotive than you would be normally when you're giving a speech is really important, because I'm considering how persuasive and passionate you are when you're speaking. So make sure that you're showing that in your facial expressions, in the way that you're moving in front of the camera. But you guys are all going to be great. I can't wait to watch.
And then our other judge is Miss Wendy Rubis, right?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me okay? Can you guys hear me? I'm just making sure. Okay, good. I'm Wendy Rubis. I'm a practicing attorney. I practice health law. I've been attorney for 20 some years. I've judged several national tournaments. So I've seen many of you, and I may have judged some of you more than once, I think. So it's a pleasure to have a chance to see you today. As an attorney, I'm looking for logical arguments. I'll be able to tell if you skip a step in a logic. And I like to see a room debate. I like to see the debate advance, responding to points that were made and not leaving hanging participles in the room. So good luck to all of you, and thanks very much for the chance to judge you today.
Okay, is that it, or do we have any other judges? Okay, I think that's it. So now I'm just gonna do a roll call, and this is also gonna serve as a mic check. I'll just go down the list. If I call your name, just unmute yourself, say hi, and then I'll confirm whether we can hear you or not. So let me get that up real quick. Sorry, Discord just crashed.
Since Discord is not working for you, Pranav,
I just got it back up. Okay, I can do it right now.
Cool.
All right, so Nick Chan. Do we have Nick Chan?
Yes.
Okay. Your mic is working great.
Yeah.
Norman.
Hi.
Christian Rodriguez.
Here.
Pranav Atluri.
Here.
Ariane Ranjan.
Here.
Olivia Pasquarella.
Here.
Ajasvi Saxena.
Here.
Isaac Khan.
Here.
Aston Kuahara.
Here.
Zach Wu.
He will be either late or not in attendance.
Okay, and Jay Bhatia canceled, right?
Yes, sir, that would be accurate.
Okay, so we have roll call done. Okay, at 1:05 p.m. PST, I call this session into order. Do we have any motions on the floor? Senator Kuahara?
I motion to open Congress.
Are there any seconds? Assuming unanimous consent, the floor is now open for debate. Are there any other motions on the floor? Any other motions on the floor? Okay, yeah, we have docket. Okay, I forgot we don't have docket. Okay, we'll be continuing with the only piece of legislation for this round, a bill to instate a UBI. Do we have an author present? Do we have a sponsor present? Senator Pasquarella, you have the floor.
Thank the chair. That's Senator Pasquarella, spelled Pasquerella. Do we need the codes for this round? I think mine is 180. Just let me know if everyone can hear me okay and when you're ready. Yeah. Cool. The idea of a universal basic income was first introduced by presidential candidate Andrew Yang. And although his campaign has long been over, he does leave us with one lasting message, which is math, in his campaign slogan, which stands for Make Americans Think Harder. In this debate, I will challenge everyone to please think a little bit harder, not just for ourselves as legislators, but for every single American that is currently struggling in this crisis, which is why I beg you to please affirm this legislation. First, let's understand the problem that we are facing in the status quo. It's a great financial recession caused by our current pandemic. Martha White, an economic analyst for NBC News, found last week that due to the current pandemic, we have already lost $5 trillion in our current American GDP. Right now, we have an unemployment rate that has skyrocketed to a rate of 14.7%. 26 million jobs have been lost. Those are largely the jobs of poor minimum wage workers. They are the ones that are hardest hit by this crisis. But also every single American, who even those above the poverty line, are also currently struggling to find a way to keep their homes and to keep meals on the table, even when a check isn't coming in every week. Let's understand how my legislation helps to solve this problem, because it provides greater benefit than the current welfare state does to the poorest Americans. Section 2 provides 3 cuts to 3 different welfare programs: SNAP, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families Program, and the Supplemental Security Income Program. Research conducted from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities in November of 2019 found the average American individual only receives $256 a month from SNAP. But compare this to what Section 1 says, which is that every American age 18 and older is going to receive $1,000 a month. This is going to be a very reliable source of government revenue, and it's going to all come from a value-added tax. Look to Maury Backman, a journalist for USA Today, in May of 2019, who found that the average American spends around $18,000 every year on non-essential items. Section 2 defines what the value-added tax is going to be on. It's going to be on every item that is not defined as an essential item, such as food or medication. This is so important because it's not regressive on the poorest Americans who are struggling to get by. It's only going to be taxing the items that most Americans don't really need in the first place, but are still going to be purchasing. And this has so much of a great impact for every single American, because the UBI is structured in a way that is going to maximize economic benefit. And that's so important to boost spending, which will help us to build ourselves out of the recession. Fortune in September of 2017 stated that a UBI of $1,000 a month would grow the US economy by over 12.5% in 8 years. We already know now that this recession is going to last at least 5 years. What we can do now as legislators is pass legislation that boosts financial spending so that people can start to get their jobs back. And we can start to minimize the threat of this recession. We can start to build this recession out of what is currently happening and to prevent us from falling into a complete, full-blown economic depression. Understand that as legislators, we have a responsibility to think harder. We need to think harder about the people on the margins who are suffering the most in this current crisis. And those are the minimum wage workers.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes and 4 seconds. Again, that's 3 minutes and 4 seconds. This will be followed by 2 minutes of cross-examination. All questioners rise. Raise your placard. Senator Otluri and Senator Chen.
Hi, Representative. So under today's legislation, if each person above 18 gets $1,000 and that lifts them out of the poverty line, what's the incentive to actually work?
Okay, so $12,000 a year is well below the poverty line. So they still have a great incentive to
Okay,
work,
right.
because
But
no
even
American
for
can live on.
Okay, but even for low-income workers, if that $1,000 is going to get them out of the poverty line and pay for their food and stuff, isn't that not an incentive to actually go to work?
$12,000 doesn't take you out of the poverty line. The poverty line for an American individual is around $20,000 a year.
Okay, right. But if it helps them still pay for food and other necessities, why would they actually need to go to work to actually get those?
To stay above the poverty line, because $12,000 is not above the poverty line.
No, but like in the status quo, if you actually give them $100, there was a research on this, it will be enough to actually like bring them up above the poverty line.
When people receive SNAP benefits, they don't quit their jobs. When people receive any kind of welfare, they don't quit their jobs. It's just
right, but
a continuation of the status quo.
Right, but if
Hey, Representative. So
Hi.
you specifically told us that the average American receives $256 in monthly benefits, right? But what about the poorest Americans?
So the average American that is receiving SNAP is well below the poverty line, right? So that would include the poorest Americans. The poorest Americans, yes, they'll receive more money, but if we're thinking towards the average of Americans that need this program, they're still going to be benefiting from $1,000 a month.
But today's legislation doesn't just cut SNAP programs, right? It cuts other programs like supplemental security income, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how much do low-income Americans receive under those programs?
like you said, it does depend on what your current income is. It's adjusted towards that.
But what about the average low-income American? Would the majority receive more or less when you consider all of the programs under today's?
If you consider all the programs, like it's very unlikely that the average American living under the poverty line is benefiting from all three of those programs. They probably have one, two, but at this point, it's not likely that they're
Why would
getting
they
all
not
three.
benefit from all three programs?
Because they're not currently getting that in status quo.
Questioning period has elapsed. Thank you, Senator. Speaker may remain in her seat. Seeing as we just completed a speech in the affirmation, we're now in line for a speech on the negation. Next speakers rise. Senator Ranjan.
Thank the chair. For my judges, this is Senator Ranjan speaking for the first time today. I believe my speaker code is 176. Whenever you guys are ready, I'll be happy to begin. Good. And PO, good?
I'm always ready.
Perfect. Let me just get my timer out. All right. As a Congress, we always see ourselves as the saviors of the people. I mean, after all, we are the ones who are actually passing legislation to help them. And most people are proud of what we do, at least until we actually pass something. And this UBI debate is just case in point. We promised to help our constituents stop living paycheck to paycheck, just as Ms. Pasquarella explained in her speech, and then we're willing to pass a piece of legislation like this one that would just hurt them even more. So let's stop worrying about the paychecks, because what this Congress really needs is a reality check. Unfortunately, the reason you failed today's legislation is because it's counterintuitive for the economy, primarily because of the overlooked part of Section 1, which states that we're going to implement a 10% value-added tax, which is levied on specific goods and services. Now, Ms. Pasquarelli just shrugs this idea off as a funding mechanism for the UBI program, but it's actually a lot more. The key about a value-added tax is that it accumulates throughout the entire supply chain. To explain this even further, let's look at how an effect like this would actually impact oil prices. With an additional value-added tax, the oil refinery, the oil distribution plant, and the final retail station that actually sells this gas to the consumer all have to pay taxes to the government. As a result, the government has the ability to spend a whole lot more money. But here's the inherent harm to that. It places a much bigger tax burden on the average American. As the Heritage Foundation tells us in September 8th of 2017, nations with value-added taxes impose a tax burden that is more than 40% heavier than those countries without value-added taxes. So essentially, if we pass this legislation, we're taking money out of the pockets of the same people we're trying to put the money back into. Ms. Pasquarella, understand that there are plenty of other essential items that are still taxed with this bill, like gas, for example. And that's going to affect millions of Americans. So it is essentially a regressive tax at its core, which is completely completely opposite of what you said earlier. And the impacts of this are even further. According to a study by the Stotler Economics, a value-added tax of only 3% would reduce the typical family's income by $1,000 and destroy 2.1 million jobs in 5 years. One thing is clear. If we pass today's legislation, we're not passing a universal basic income. We're passing a universally bad idea. But not only does this bill add a tax, it abolishes all government benefits that are vital for a post-COVID-19 economy, because more and more people are relying on these services more than ever. Los Angeles Times tells us in March 31st of 2020 that SNAP, for example, served more than 4 million people in California as of January alone. However, while specialized welfare programs specifically help people at the poverty line, a universal basic income gives an equal amount of money to every single American, regardless of the money in their bank accounts, which effectively widens income inequality. As the Center on Budget Policy tells us in February 9th of 2018, you are taking the money specifically meant for the people in the bottom fifth of the population and converting that to universal payments to people all the way up the income scale. You are actually increasing poverty and inequality rather than reducing them. Ms. Pasquarella, understand that if you pass this legislation, you will not help people stay above the poverty line. You're making sure they remain there. The burden of proof for the affirmation is to prove that the UBI is beneficial, but they fail to meet that burden. If we pass this legislation, we aren't the heroes, we're the villains. You're muted.
Thank you guys for that. Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes and 13 seconds. Again, that's 3 minutes and 13 seconds. Mr. Ranjan, could you please unmute yourself?
Yeah, sorry.
We're now in line for 2 minutes of questioning. All questioners rise. Senator Saxena, and then Senator Rodriguez.
Hi, Senator. So what year was your Heritage Foundation article published in?
The Heritage Foundation article was published in 2017.
Okay, so it uses the same data from an article that was published in 1993. Do you, if it's been more than like 25 years, do you actually believe that those statistics are going to be the exact same?
I don't know what information you're referring to. This one's specifically from September 8th, 2017, and it just shows the analysis between countries with a value-added
Okay,
tax and
so
countries
that
without.
like let's move on, even if we have
Okay.
a discrepancy that way.
That's
So what does even if we're giving money to everyone, like what does that mean for middle income and like higher income Americans?
For sure. So what I want to talk about is how it's going to make them, primarily the high income people, have a lot more money than the people we're trying to help, which are below the poverty
Okay, so
line.
but won't
With
they
specialized,
still benefit in some way?
no, what we should be doing is increasing the amount of money we're putting to our specialized welfare programs like SNAP. They're the ones that are
Have those
beneficial.
specialized income. You're muted.
Am I good to go, or?
My bad. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, hi, Mr. Ranjan. So you cited examples of other countries who had value-added taxes about hurting their people, right?
Yeah.
Do any of those countries have a UBI?
A couple of them did have UBI pilot programs. Not a single country has actually.
Did any of the countries have like a nationwide UBI program?
I don't think any countries have had that so far. No.
Right. So if we have a value-added tax in conjunction with a UBI, wouldn't we see the negative effects you talk about offset?
Not exactly, because the whole funding mechanism for the UBI is coming at the from the value-added tax, which I already told you hurts everybody.
And you said the only thing that affects poor people from the value-added tax is gas. Wouldn't we see the negative effects offset by a UBI?
Gas was just one of the examples I used. There's plenty of other goods and resources that are still affecting people. What was that?
What's another one? Like, what's another essential resource for these people?
Electricity, power. These things are still going to be taxed because that's coming from a coal power plant.
If we have a UBI in conjunction with a value-added tax, wouldn't we see the majority of the negative benefits you cite offset?
Elapsed. Thank you, Senator. Speaker may remain in his seat. Okay, so we're running into a problem that I didn't think would happen. Usually Zoom doesn't stop me at the 40 minutes like ever, but it's stopping me now like in 10 minutes. So what I'll do is during the next speech, I'll just send out another link into the Discord and then we'll just hop on that as soon as this one ends. Okay?
Or I believe we can technically just all leave the meeting and then rejoin, and that should reset the meeting timer as long as Pranav you don't hit end meeting for all.
Okay, so I would just end meeting and then leave myself.
Do not end meeting, just leave meeting.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that. If that doesn't work, I'll just get another Zoom link ready so that we can hop on that if necessary. Okay. Seeing as we just completed a cycle, are there any motions on the floor? Seeing none, hearing none, we'll now move on to the next cycle. All affirmative speakers rise. Senator Lurie, you stand unopposed.
I thank the chair. This is Senator Lurie, spelled ATLURI. I believe my code is 103, if that helps the judges. PO, can you just let me know when the judges are ready? Because I don't have like the grid view on.
Yeah, so for every speech, if the judges could just, like, if the judges like prefer to have their camera off, if they could just like send me when they're ready, I'll just let the speaker know. And then also I'll like in the middle of the speech, I'll send the link to all the speaker codes so that you guys could, if you guys could just say your speaker codes when you're introducing yourself before your speech, that would be great.
Sounds good. How do I tell you I'm ready? Sorry. What do I need to do to that? Can I put it in the chat? How about that? Can I do that?
Exactly. So in the chat, there's like the drop down. You can select my name and just send me privately.
Will do. Yeah. I'll do that. Thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Am I good to go or?
Good to go. Good to go.
Our dollar used to be backed by gold. Today, our dollar is used to justify the wealth gap, backing it with poverty instead of prosperity. Today, we bring back the potential for the golden age, upholding our standards of equality by redefining what our dollar stands for. Stop the inequality, pass the bill. But first, fundamentally, you pass today's piece of legislation because it increases bargaining power for lower income workers. In the status quo, our income inequality is at its highest. That means that marginalized groups are one of the first to get fired. Representative Ranjan, you champion the argument of the harms of value-added tax, but you need to understand that non-essential items are not included. As a result, it's not going to disproportionately hurt lower income workers because they aren't spending a majority of their money on non-essential items. Atlantic in October 2015 explains that Black workers receive extra scrutiny from bosses. They get worse performance reviews, lower wages by 28%, and even job loss. They are treated unfairly and typically are less financially stable. But UBI helps fix this because Vox in 2017 corroborates that the most marginalized groups in the workplace have no financial cushion since they live paycheck to paycheck. This makes them more vulnerable to retaliation and job loss. Under today's legislation, you give them a financial cushion, a bargaining power to negotiate with employees because with more financial stability, they're less likely to get fired. But let's say it's the worst case scenario and they actually get fired. With the UBI, they won't have to live paycheck to paycheck. They'll still be able to live a happy and healthy life. Senator Ranjan, understand that today's legislation helps those workers you care about. You help provide equal opportunities for minority workers and stop the promotion of workplace discrimination. When our employees can't even talk to their bosses about fair and equal wages, the American dream is no longer a reality. Senator Ranjan, don't take that away from them. But secondly, you affirm today's legislation because it's going to increase the demand of workers. In the status quo, Alaska has already implemented a $2,000 UBI. They have found positive effects on their workers. Forbes, in March 5th, 2018, finds that researchers found that the unconditional payments to residents had no real impact on full-time unemployment levels. They did find that part-time work increased by 17%. So Senator Ranjan, you talked about the ineffectivity of today's legislation, but I would argue that when you implement a UBI, more money goes directly to our businesses. That means they have an increase in demand that can be only tackled with increase of those workers. Those results are seen in Australia, where more workers were needed after that implementation. When our citizens can actually put food on the table and support their families, that's the biggest impact in today's round. Let's finally redefine our dollar, bring back the golden age, and affirm.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 2 minutes and 58 seconds. Again, that's 2 minutes and 58 seconds. This will be followed by 2 minutes of questioning. All cross-examiners rise. Senator Khan, and then Senator Ranjan.
Hi, Senator. So you talked a lot about how you guys providing essentially a financial cushion, right? But under this legislation, which repeals government welfare benefits, doesn't that also include unemployment claims?
Right, yeah. So I told you in Australia about unemployment that when you actually give more money to businesses, that directly means that you have more demand. With more demand, you obviously need more workers.
But okay, besides the economic growth, which is a long-term impact, in the short term, when we have the coronavirus pandemic going on with millions of unemployment claims, how are you going to substantiate for that with a simple UBI, which doesn't provide as much?
Right. So in the status quo, everybody needs like essential items, right? So even during coronavirus, people are going to spend the UBI on essential items. That means that businesses need more employees to actually deliver those.
So no, that's still a long-term impact because we're not going to see substantial growth for employment for a while from the UBI. So given that we're removing all of the safety nets without having anything in place except for $1,000 a month.
As Senator Pasquarelli told you, UBI is giving you more money than those benefit programs. And
Senator, is there a guarantee that that any country's universal basic income is providing more than social welfare programs are?
Right. So there's not a guarantee, but as Senator Pasquarelli,
so yeah, I just want to further on that statement.
Sure.
So if you cited a study from Alaska showing that part-time jobs went up a little bit, is that a guarantee that that same result is going to show nationwide?
Right. So even you followed by through logic, right? So if you give people more money and they're more likely to spend it on businesses, that directly affects demand, right? So if you have more demand, you need more workers to actually tackle it.
So then why did a country like Finland, who tried to implement a country-wide UBI, stop after a year if it was working so well?
I'm not sure you can tell me.
Because the results that you're talking about economic gains were not falling through. If it's not working in Finland, what's the guarantee that it'll work here magically?
But I tell you it worked in Alaska, and I also gave you the logic
But it's not nationwide, correct? Alaska, it works, that's fine, but it's not a nationwide impact.
Alaska was nationwide.
Sorry, I was muted there. Questioning period did elapse, though. Thank you, Senator. Speaker may remain in his seat. So I'm gonna send the Zoom link for the next meeting in the chat right now. And then if everyone could leave this one and then get back on that one, we'll resume debate there. That's true. I'll send it in the Discord as well, okay? Yeah. Jimmy, can you transfer host to me? Okay.
Pranav, you're the host now. It's good.
And Joey, could you set the live stream to this one again?
Live stream's already been set. It's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Is everyone here?
We're missing Mr. Khan.
Everyone can turn on their cameras so that I know you're actually here. Is everyone back? Okay. Everyone's back, so we'll just pick up from where we left off. Seeing that was just a speech and the affirmation, we're now in line for a speech on the negation. Next speakers rise. Senator Darman, you have the floor.
I thank the chair. Hi everyone, that's Senator Darman, D-A-R-M-O-N, from New York's 12th Congressional District. Any sign and I'll get started. Actually, is anyone not ready? Great.
Everyone's ready.
When Andrew Yang was asked to describe the purpose of a UBI, he told us that we had to provide a safety net to our most vulnerable Americans. That's why I find it so ironic when this legislation takes this idea and tarnishes it to the point where it throws under the bus the very people that it's meant to help. It's because this Congress has a duty to help those most in need that we have to negate. First, we fail for the sole reason that this legislation directly harms our four most vulnerable populations: our elderly, our handicapped, our poor, and our immigrants. Let's go down the list. First, passing harms our seniors. Section 2 repeals the Supplemental Security Income, SSI. That's important because, as Mr. Chen alludes in questioning, Fox explains that the average SSI benefit is $16,000 a year. Today, we replace that with a $12,000 income. You don't have to be Andrew Yang to realize that 16 minus 12 leads to a $4,000 annual loss for our seniors. But second, we fail because it throws under the bus those with mental and physical handicaps. Here's why. SSI also takes care of 8 million blind and disabled people. The caveat is their average benefit is $1,300 a month. This legislation scraps that away and replaces it with a $1,000 check. And I have to say, I never thought that the greed of this Congress would come to a point where we'd have to debate abolishing all federal handicap assistance. But next, we also fail because it repeals the very programs that allows the poor and to eat and have a roof over their head. Here's why that's so bad. The New York Times explains that SNAP, single-handedly puts food on the table of 34 million Americans, and housing vouchers lifted 40 million people out of poverty. You can't claim to help the poor, Ms. Pascarella, if you abolish the programs that allowed them to survive. But lastly, fail, because it also harms the millions of legal immigrants. Section 1 describes the people actually getting the check only as American citizens. This supposedly universal income goes to everyone except the 22 million legal immigrants who, just like me, reside in this country but have been ignored by this government. Here's why that's so bad. The Center for Immigration Studies finds that immigrant households are twice as dependent on welfare programs. This legislation abolishes the programs that allow them to survive and doesn't allow them to join its replacement. Uphold your duty. Fight for those who need it. Negate.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes and 2 seconds. Again, that's 3 minutes and 2 seconds. All questioners rise. Senator Pascarella and then Senator Utluri.
Hi, Senator. So I just looked up the average income that someone's going to get from SSI program, and it's told me that the maximum you can ever get from this program is $1,500, and that's if you're a married couple. However, if you're a married couple under this legislation, you're going to get $2,000. So what's the harm here?
Wait, Ms. Pascarella, I just told you that the average SSI benefit is $16,000 a year. But
That's simply not correct, though.
No, you're right. It's $1,500 a month, right? There's a difference between $1,500 a month and $1,000 a month that you replace it with.
You only get $15,000 a month for two people, for a couple, right? That couple under this legislation gets $2,000. So how are they not benefited?
I mean, my source is literally the Social Security, the organization in charge of Social Security. When it tells you that the average benefit is $16,000 a year, this legislation only gives 12. But even if you don't buy that, right? The affirmation has the burden to prove that all.
Utluri.
Hi, Senator. So in 2020, how much does SNAP give to the average household?
I mean, SNAP puts food on the table of 34 million Americans.
Okay, right. So it gives $167 for households. Under today's legislation, we give those people $100,000 per person. Isn't a net benefit?
So here's what I'm telling you. The burden of every affirmation speaker after me is to prove that the combined benefits of all of these programs together are less than $8,000 a month.
How many people are in like every single benefit category?
Actually, most of them, because when you hit one, you actually fill out the quota to be in SNAP, to be in housing, and to be on SSI.
Right, but the average constituent isn't going to be in all three benefits. So let's say they're just in SNAP.
But I'm telling you that, first, for handicaps, you lose $300 a month. For SSI, you lose $4,000 a year. For SNAP and housing vouchers, you can lose up to 31.
Questioning period has elapsed. Thank you, Senator. Speaker may remain in his seat. Seeing as we've just completed a speech in the negation, we're at the end of a cycle. Are there any motions on the floor? Seeing none, hearing any motions? Okay, seeing none, hearing none, we'll now move on to the next cycle. And one thing before we move on to the next cycle, I'm going to send the link to the speaker codes list. So if everyone could find their speaker code on that list, just Control F, and then say it when you introduce yourself. That would help the judges. So I just sent the link to that in the chat. So for every future speaker, just check your speaker code and then just mention that when you introduce yourself. So we're now in line for a speech on the affirmation. All affirmative speakers rise. Senator Rodriguez, you stand unopposed.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Christian Rodriguez. My speaker code is 177. Whenever you're ready. And I'm assuming my presiding officer is ready. Okay, cool.
All the judges are ready.
Awesome. When we were elected to office, we were expected to represent everyone, no matter your background, race, or income. But yet we live in a country where your race determines how much income you get, where your income determines just how great of a life you live, and where not everyone is born equal. Which is why I am so proud to pass a piece of legislation that finally changes that makes sure everyone is equal and everyone gets the income they need to survive. So far in this debate, We've heard from the negation that today's legislation, by implementing a universal basic income, is inherently worse than the current welfare program we have. I strongly contest that idea for one key reason. A UBI is better than our welfare program because our welfare program discriminates against minorities. The New York Times on May 23rd of 2018 explains the problem we have with our welfare system, explaining that states have added work requirements to many of their welfare programs, basically meaning you need to be working a certain amount of time in order to qualify. The problem is they offer exemptions for whites, but not for minorities, with that same article finding that in many states, whites were often 85% of the population that was exempted, whereas minorities made up only 1.2%, specifically with African Americans. That shows the huge disparity we have in our welfare system, basically saying if you are a minority, you do not get equal benefits. Take this into consideration when The Atlantic explains on June 6th of 2017 that minorities received only $1 for every $25 a white person received in welfare benefits. What we have right now is an unequal system that makes sure the color of your skin determines just how much aid you get. But a universal basic income is inherently better because no matter who you are, you get the same amount as everyone else, $12,000 a year. And let's just break up this myth that has flooded this Congress that a UBI is bad for our economy. That is just false, with Marshall Steinberg from the Roosevelt Institute in August of 2017 explaining that by implementing a $12,000 a year UBI in conjunction with a value-added tax would increase our GDP by 12% in the next 8 years. Everyone benefits. So Mr. Ranjan, when you're so concerned about people suffering under this legislation, just remember one thing. One, it's better than our welfare system. And remember another thing, by increasing our GDP and therefore improving our economy, everyone benefits, not just those at the top. But then there's additional concerns about a value-added tax brought up by Representative Ranjan and other representatives in cross-examination. Once again, a value-added tax with a UBI is not bad, because when Mr. Ranjan says a value-added tax hurts the poor, he fails to mention one thing. The study he cites does not take in conjunction a UBI. Let's examine a study that does. The Tax Policy Center on January 30th of 2020 found that a value-added tax in conjunction with a UBI would actually lower taxable income by 17% for those who are living below the poverty line, whereas those at the top 1% lose 5% of their income, shortening the wealth gap and making sure those at the bottom of our country benefit, and everyone is equal.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of about 3 minutes and 16 seconds. As soon as 3:15, just to let you guys know for the future reference, as soon as you hit 3:15, I'm going to be muting you. When you see the stop sign, you should be wrapping it up because your grace period is technically only 5 seconds. We're now in line for 2 minutes of cross-examination. All questioners rise. Senator Kuwahara and then Senator Ranjan.
Great, I thank the chair. So Representative, you told us that some individual states have work requirements, correct?
Yes.
But aren't state welfare programs different than national welfare programs?
What we see is, as of right now, the current welfare program we have discriminates against minorities.
Right, but that's...
No. The specific state requirements were actually brought upon by the Trump administration that legalized this type of exemption.
No, okay, so what you're describing here is the state-by-state programs that each individual state has. So
right,
each individual state has a different program,
right?
Correct?
And the exemptions I'm talking about were legalized specifically by the Trump administration on a federal level.
Right,
the problem we see is whether it's state or federal, the current welfare system still discriminates. A UBI fixes that problem.
But overall, don't all recipients, the poorest of our nation, don't they receive more from welfare programs as opposed to $1,000 check every month?
So I actually wanted to address that, right? So I was going to bring up a study that found the average welfare recipient receives about $14,000 a year. That's only $2,000, which was less, which I argue is minuscule considering we increase our GDP by 13% over the next 8 years.
Yeah, but Mr. Rodriguez. So we both champion this idea of equity, right? So can you explain to me how it's equal that one, like a poor person who's getting welfare programs now would now switch to a UBI, where someone like Bill Gates is earning the same amount of money a month as someone who's not able to, who's living paycheck to paycheck?
Right. So it's not a matter of like how much income you make that's like discriminatory and like what I talked about. It's rather your race. Your race is really determining how much welfare you get. And
but I'm talking about socioeconomic discrimination, right? Let's not take race into this. If we're telling someone who's making paycheck to paycheck that you're going to get the same amount of money a month as Bill Gates, why is that fair?
So what I mentioned towards the end of my speech is that a value-added tax fixes that problem, because if you're richer, you're obviously spending more money, which means you're getting taxed more often. If
Okay,
you're
so
lower income, you spend less money.
on that note,
Yes.
do welfare programs tax people right now?
I mean, you have taxes to fund welfare programs.
Okay, but you don't have welfare taxes, right? Why would we put a regressive tax like a value-added
So
tax
Ranjan,
on a
the study
UBI?
I cited found that you would decrease the income for those at the top 1% and increase income for
But
those
everyone's paying that tax.
Questioning period has elapsed. Thank you, Senator. Speaker may remain in his seat. Seeing as we just completed a speech on the affirmation, we're now in line for a speech on the negation. Next speakers rise. Senator Kuwahara, you have the floor.
I thank the chair. For the chamber's reference, my name is Senator Kuwahara from California. California, my bad. Speaker code 185. If the judges would please send me a note when you guys are ready, that would be great. Great, thank you. PO ready?
Yeah.
Great. Throughout today's debate, the affirmation paints the narrative that we'll be able to pull thousands of impoverished people out of poverty. Their narrative goes so far as to explain that people like you and me would someday be able to afford Balenciagas. Yeah, the ones that look like socks. But it is because today's legislation provides adverse negative effects on our constituency, we're going to be ultimately failing today's legislation. So first, realize that we're failing because today's bill disproportionately hurts the poor more than anybody else. Now, we've seen the same tag with many other negation speakers. However, let me distance myself here. Upon first inspection on Section 1 of today's legislation, it states that we're going to be implementing a value-added tax of 10%. Great, we've established that. But while today's legislation aims to benefit the most impoverished of our nation with that $1,000 check every month, I would contend just the opposite. Now, Reuters explains this perfectly on November 19th of 2019, where they mentioned that a VAT tax has historically hurt the poor the most, but not because they're being not because they're being taxed more, but because the cost for consumer goods increased significantly. Representative Ranjan already explained this briefly, but let me go a little bit further. And this is because a VAT tax also includes corporations and, most importantly, manufacturing companies. Now, these companies are the ones that are taking the brunt of the taxes, forcing them to increase prices, and that's going to indirectly affect every single person, including impoverished members of our society. Now, the New York Times elaborates on this on August 15th of 2019, where they explain that as a result of a VAT tax of just 7% in 1993, it increased the cost of living expenses for everyone, including the poor people, by an average of over 40%. So no, Representative Pascarella, as a result of passing this legislation, we aren't putting food on the table. I would contend that we're taking food off the table for those that need it most in our nation. That is 38 million people that aren't going to have nearly as much money as they need to support their families, to support their children. When you pass today's legislation, you only further the strain on our poorest. But Representative Outlery explains that today's legislation doesn't necessarily affect the poor as much. However, let's realize on my second point of analysis that we're going to be failing today's legislation because it ends welfare programs. Now, the demographic we should be most concerned about, of course, is going to be the poor and the lower middle class, which are the groups that receive the most in welfare spending. Representative Darman explained this for the poor and the disabled, but let's go a little bit further. As Section 1 again outlines that when we pass, we are going to be abolishing all welfare programs. Now, that is extremely significant with today's legislation. The Huffington Post explains on February 21st of 2020 that the national welfare, not the state welfare, has provided over $2,300 a month, and that over 97% of welfare recipients have stated that they will be unable to support themselves, their family, their children without these programs in place. Mr. Rodriguez, understand that when you pass today's legislation, the people that are the poorest in our country, they're the ones losing out here. They're losing their welfare programs that they need to support their family. One thing that we have to make absolutely clear is that the $1,000 a month that this bill provides is not nearly enough to reconcile and compensate. Realize that when you pass, you leave our people, our children, our poorest without food, without clean water, and without housing. And that's why you're failing.
Sorry, my phone fell, but thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes and 7 seconds. Again, that's 3 minutes and 7 seconds. All questioners rise. Senator Pascarella and Senator Rodriguez.
Hi, Senator. So all the sources that you state for the value-added tax being regressive, were those sources and those studies conducted on essential goods or non-essential goods?
Those studies were used for every single thing that we taxed in the year of 1993.
Right. So under this legislation, we're not going to be taxing those essential goods, right? And so
but at the same
really
time, in 1993, we didn't tax
Americans
essential
got.
goods. No, in 1993, we also didn't tax the same essential goods that this bill outlines.
How much more can low-income Americans really be buying, though, except for these things that we're
Okay,
outlining?
like I
How
mentioned in my
aggressive can it be?
like I mentioned in my first point of analysis, everybody is going to be infected, including the lowest income people in our nation, because corporations need to compensate for the tax that they're paying by increasing the prices for their goods. Like Representative Ranjan explained, that includes prices such as oil, which people need to drive their cars.
In 1993, were we also giving people $1,000 a month to compensate for what was getting taken out?
Like I mentioned in my second point, people are losing over $2,300 every single month because of this. You're going to have a deficit of $1,300 per month. This bill does not compensate.
Senator Rodriguez.
Hi, so let's talk about the value added income tax for a second, right? So for the majority of the things that lower income people buy, is it an essential good?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's protected under this legislation, is it not?
Yeah, except for other goods that they need to buy from manufacturing companies such as, like I mentioned before, oil companies.
Awesome, so they have $1,000 to do that now. What's the problem?
The problem is that they're losing $2,300 in welfare every month. That's a $1,300 deficit.
Right, but if you have $1,000, like what specific welfare programs?
Like it outlines in the bill, there's 3 welfare programs, one of which is SNAP, which a lot of people, 38 million Americans, benefit from.
Yeah, and as mentioned earlier, SNAP doesn't provide that much money. So my question to my main question is this, right? If our economy is improving from a UBI, wouldn't those negative effects be offset?
Again, like I mentioned, you're going to be losing $1,300 here. You yourself tell us that they aren't buying non-essential goods.
We increase our GDP by 13%.
Yeah, but who does that benefit? That benefits the top people in our country. That benefits Jeff Bezos.
Not just the top percent.
Elapsed. Thank you, Senator. Speaker may remain in his seat. Seeing as we're at the end of the cycle, are there any motions on the floor? Seeing none, hearing none, we'll now move on to the next affirmative speech. All asked speakers rise. Senator Chen, you stand unopposed.
I thank the chair. This is Representative Chen speaking for the first time this session. Is everyone ready? Good? Awesome. In the very first speech of today's debate, Representative Pasquarella told us that today's legislation would help lower-income Americans. In the very next speech, Representative Ranjan told us that it would cripple the economy and destroy lower-income households. Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw was right. If you laid all of the world's economists end to end, you still wouldn't reach a definite conclusion. Today's debate has come down to weighing the numbers between whether or not today's legislation would provide more or less benefits to welfare recipients. The crux of this debate comes down to the over 40 million Americans who are in poverty. Pass for one reason and one reason only, because you help impoverished Americans on a quantifiable level. Now, throughout this debate, negative speakers have argued that by eliminating the welfare system, we create a gap that cannot be filled. 2 responses to that. First, nowhere in today's legislation do we eliminate welfare programs. Under Section 1, lower-income Americans could choose between the current welfare benefits they receive and a UBI. But more importantly, nobody on the negative has actually touched on the aggregate impact of welfare as a whole. Because Representative Ranjan talks specifically about SNAP, while Representative Darman talks specifically about the supplemental security income. But when you quantify the aggregate of all of those together, that's not enough to fully substitute for the UBI. In fact, the 2017 study by the American Enterprise Institute finds that for the 29 million lowest income Americans, eliminating welfare entirely in favor of a $1,000 a month UBI would increase benefits by $3,200. But Representative Darman might be skeptical because he tells us in his speech that supplemental security income alone is worth $16,000 annually to low-income Americans. But here's the issue. That includes Social Security assistance, which is independent of supplemental security income. As the Social Security Administration explains this year, disabled workers receive $12,500 from the government and the Social Security Administration, but that includes Social Security. When you take out Social Security, which isn't a welfare program, the Congressional Center for Budget and Policy Priorities finds that only $771 a month is received on average through supplemental security income. Too many Americans are living on the outskirts of freedom. Too many Americans don't have the opportunity to fulfill their dreams, to find their livelihoods. It's time to affirm and bridge the socioeconomic gap. But second, I want to quantify an impact that was brought up by Representative Rodriguez, because in questioning Representative Ranjan asked Representative Rodriguez to look beyond race, towards the socioeconomic barriers that everyone faces. Let's do that right now. The Atlantic explains in February of 2019 that regardless of race, barriers like work requirements cause 13 million Americans to miss out on welfare benefits they're eligible for. 1/3 of Americans that earn less than $12,000 a year receive no welfare. Today's legislation bridges that gap. At the end of this debate, there is only one inevitable conclusion: the affirmation. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of exactly 3 minutes and 5 seconds. Again, that's 3 minutes and 5 seconds. All questioners rise. Senator Darman and then Senator Kuwahara.
Hi, Mr. Chen. So let's say by your entire argument, you only talked about Social Security. What about housing and what about SNAP?
Right, so my 2017 American Enterprise Institute study aggregated every single welfare program and found that if you eliminated all of them and substituted them with a $1,000 UBI, like under today's legislation, you would still receive $3,000 more on average. So when you consider every program, it benefits the lower income households of America.
Mr. Chen, can you actually give me a number? How much do people receive on average for housing specifically?
I just gave you a number, Representative. $3,200 more if you pass today's legislation.
That's not my question. For housing specifically, how much benefits do people get?
Right, so housing is included under the American Enterprise Institute study.
Right. So you're telling me that housing in New York, in Manhattan where I live, costs less than $1,000 a month alone?
Right, so I recognize that there's specific geographical barriers that we may need to work out, but
so
overall, today's legislation helps millions of Americans.
Right, so your study is only true.
Receiving welfare right now.
Mr. Chen, your study is only true in some places.
Questioning period has elapsed. Senator Kuwahara.
I thank the chair. So you told us that this bill gives people the option between welfare and the UBI, correct?
Right, of course.
So what does line 4 and 5 say when it says all current government benefits will be abolished?
Right. So if you look at section 1 of this bill, it says that it allows a choice. Right?
No, it's okay. Section 1 of this bill in lines 4 and 5 tell us that all current government benefits will be abolished. Doesn't that include these welfares?
It just says that current benefit programs include the Supplemental Security Income Program. It doesn't say anything about abolishment. The first line of section 1 says choice, if you look at it.
No, the first line of section 1 tells us that like everybody will receive a $1,000 income. Are you looking at the right bill?
I am. It's the one on the Discord, right?
A bill that is a UBI. It says in line 4 and 5 that, so that includes these benefits that everybody in the negation, such as myself, have been talking about, correct?
Okay, sure, but even if you consider that, you still receive more benefits if you abolish the entirety of the social safety net.
But as I mentioned that there's a $1,300 deficit, and you haven't this.
Questioning period has elapsed. Thank you, Senator. Speaker may be seated.
I thank the chair.
Seeing as that was just a speech on the affirmation, we're now in line for a speech on the negation. Next speakers rise. Senator Khan, you stand unopposed.
I thank the chair. I believe my speaker code is 186 for the judges. So if anyone's not ready, can they please tell me? Otherwise, I will go ahead and begin. I'm assuming my presiding officer is always ready.
Yeah. I'll give you the green light when both judges are also ready. Both judges are ready now.
All right. The mistake of the affirmation in today's debate is their desire for unwarranted change. By passing this legislation, you rob American citizens of the programs that have sustained livelihoods and households around our nation. Don't let failure become our legacy. Negate. So first, let's delve deeper into the specifics of this debate so that we can bring the flaws of the affirmation to the surface. Senator Ranjan was the first speaker to tell us that Section 1 targets the government aid programs like SNAP, TANF, SSI, Medicaid, and CHIP at the expense of implementing a UBI. But the negation isn't going to win this debate just through the acronyms that the affirmation abolishes. It's going to win this debate on the fact that Section 1 is an explicit threat to the stability of millions of American households. Because in a debate about Americans, it's funny that the affirmation has ignored them. Dan Baltz, writing for the Washington Post just 1 month ago, helped us contextualize the impacts of Section 1 within the status quo, something no one else in this debate has done. He tells us that the coronavirus pandemic has made the role of government welfare vitally important because for the first time ever, many Americans are looking to the government for their very economic survival. That is the crux of today's debate, Senator Chen, and that's why you negate, because Section 1 specifically abolishes those welfare programs that you champion. So let's summarize the examination of those welfare institutions by the negation. First, Senator Ranjan already told us that SNAP has been essential to helping those families put food on the table for those who have lost their jobs and livelihoods, but that is only the tip of the iceberg. TANF also sustains cash influxes to low-income families and unemployment benefits. A part of government welfare so far ignored in this debate helps pay $400 per week to individuals who have lost their jobs to the coronavirus. And beyond that, Senator Dharman, Kuwahara, and the rest of the negation have beyond proved the impacts of SSI and SNAP funding. So Senator Pascarella, Lurie, and Chen claim that the UBI gives American citizens more money than current benefits do, but that's clearly false. When 36 million Americans filed for these benefits, passing this legislation is a legislative blunder. But then, we're also halfway through this debate already, so let's shine a light on the problems of the affirmation and weigh the arguments thus far. The premise of every affirmation argument is that a UBI provides a substantially larger financial cushion than current welfare benefits. And Senator Pascarella and Lurie provides this with their evidence. However, Senator Ranjan and Dharman already told you about the benefits from SNAP. $40 million of funding. But additionally, the sole word why these programs are better suited for the status quo than a UBI is their ability to be modified, boosted, and supplemented during times of trouble, which is corroborated by the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, telling us that during the coronavirus, federal welfare programs have provisions built into them to allow for flexibility and additional funding during pandemics, something the UBI lacks. Don't let the affirmation play games with the pockets of American taxpayers. Differentiates between good, sound legislation and legislation that sounds good. Negate.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes and 3 seconds. Again, that's 3 minutes and 3 seconds. All cross-examiners rise. Goes to Senator Saxena and then Senator Chen.
Hi, Senator. So I'm a bit confused. As like a measure of relief, didn't we essentially pass like a very short-term UBI like barely a month ago?
We passed a one-time stimulus bill.
Yeah,
It did
so
not slash funding for social programs.
But okay, so is our current welfare system like actually effective?
Yes, you can look to everyone in the negation who's told you about the millions of dollars of funding. And
right, but okay, so what happens? Are people right now like incentivized to stay on welfare or get off welfare, which currently gives them more benefits?
Right, I would argue that regardless of whether it's a UBI or the social welfare, like there's always going to be a problem with incentivizing people, but understand that the UBI provides substantially less benefits than
okay, but if it even if like hasn't like Senator Chen already explained to you like quantifiably that a UBI would provide more benefits than the current welfare program.
Right. So first, even if you believe that study, you should look to the fact that the social welfare.
Senator Chen.
Hey, Representative. So what specifically should we look to? Continuing off the previous question.
Right. Okay. So what you should look to is first the comparative analysis of the amount of money given by the negation versus just $1,000 per individual.
Representative, didn't the American Enterprise Institute study literally give a comparative analysis comparing a
right,
$1,000
so
UBI?
You never explained how that study specifically calculates the added benefit or losses of it. But even if you just do the simple math and look at the amount of individual benefits received from just 3 programs, TANF, SNAP, and SSI, that already is greater than $1,000 per individual.
Hasn't Representative
It doesn't matter
Rodriguez
what numbers you read to us if you look at the facts, the negation wins.
But Representative, aren't there low-income Americans who cannot access welfare in the status quo?
Welfare is built for low-income Americans to be accessed.
But there's still millions who don't get it due to bureaucratic and racial discrimination, right?
Right, but replacing a flawed system with an even more flawed system isn't going to solve the problem.
How doesn't this eliminate bureaucracy and discrimination?
Question period has elapsed. Thank you, Senator. Speaker may remain in his seat. Seeing as we just completed a speech on the negation, we're now in line for a speech on the affirmation. All asked speakers rise. Senator Saxena, you stand unopposed.
I thank the chair. For my judges, my code is 161, and I'm just pulling up the timer right now. Okay, cool. And as always, just give me any indication when you're ready.
All judges are ready.
All right. From Spanish-born humanist Juan Luis Vives in the 16th century to President Nixon, revolutionary Thomas Paine, and civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr., all of them had one shared philosophy: Despite their differences in time and ideologies, and even their common values, they all championed the idea of a UBI because they could recognize that despite their values, their primary values not reconciling, a UBI has benefits for all Americans, no matter their background. So let's look through all of the arguments of the negation and understand why your vote is going to fall in the affirmation. So first, let's understand why a UBI would actually work in the United States. Representative Ranjan questioned Representative Outlury, saying that it didn't work in Finland, so why should we have it over here? But first, let's understand that we can't use Finland as a measure of success because Finland's fundamental program was programmed to fail. According to the New York Times in May 2nd of 2018, Finland's program targeted just 2,000 randomly selected unemployed Finns to receive 560 euros a month, which is less than half of what this provides. Let's understand, it wasn't nationwide. It didn't affect all Finnish people, only the ones that were unemployed. So we can't even see all of the impacts. And next, because researchers were only instructed to look at those impacts, that study isn't enough to extrapolate upon. But if that's not enough, what can we actually look at? According to Cato in March 23rd, 2019, under a traditional citywide UBI, which is the only thing that's really been tried so far, the taxes necessary to fund such a program would likely crush any hopes for economic revitalization because businesses and wealthier residents would flee the city. But that no longer happens under a nationwide UBI because now it doesn't matter if a billionaire lives in New York or Chicago, they're still paying for the program and we're going to have enough funding. So now that we know that it's going to work, let's look at the next argument that the negation brings up. This main thing about welfare. Representative Ranjan questions Representative Kuwara. If the majority receive more or less benefits under this legislation, let's examine that even if Representative Chen is incorrect, it just doesn't matter. Cato continues that in many states, it pays better to be on welfare than it does to work. Essentially, in the status quo, it takes more money to climb up the corporate ladder and we disincentivize our constituents leaving welfare. So, Representative Darman, when you say that just because we're giving more money under a traditional welfare program, understand that's because people find it cheaper to live on welfare than to leave welfare. Under a UBI, you get rid of that metric. But now that we've understood those impacts, what are the impacts of a UBI? According to Iona Marinscu, a professor at the Penn School of Social Policy, surrounding businesses such as a neighborhood cafe or boutique see increased sales. According to University of Manitoba economist, hospitalization rates fall, high school completion rates go up, and new mothers can afford to work less. By every metric, a UBI is a better choice for our constituents, and that's why you pass.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes and 9 seconds. Again, that's 3 minutes and 9 seconds. This will be followed by 2 minutes of questioning. All questioners rise. That goes to Senator Khan and then Senator Ranjan.
Hi, so you talk a lot about the comparative benefits of UBI versus welfare. So are you admitting that it's better for the UBI to give less money than welfare?
I'm saying that if we believe that Senator Chen is incorrect, then yes, like you're putting a lot of value of, oh, it's how much money is given, but you need to understand that because people are literally disincentivized to leave welfare, you can't put that much weight into the argument of, oh, I'm going to get more money. Yes, you get more money. That's why so many people don't get off welfare.
You would rather cut the amount of aid that Americans received during the coronavirus pandemic so that people can go back to jobs that they can't have right now because we're in a recession?
Okay, so first, if you get more money, like states are already reopening, so I'm not entirely understanding that. And next, even if we cut benefits, like yes, that's what like Yang's original UBI proposed, that you cut all benefits and now you we have over 100 welfare programs right now. This is a simplified system that lets citizens choose.
The point of welfare is to help families survive. Why is cutting aid?
Senator Ranjan.
Hey, Senator. So let's just talk about historical precedents for a second, right? So we talked about Finland, but there's multiple different examples. There's Finland, India, Kenya, and all of them have one common notion that there was no positive results for the economy. So why is it so important to go to something so speculative?
Representative Outlury already showed you Alaska's example. We've already tried a small-scale UBI in Minnesota, which was the economist that I brought up. We just need to not be afraid of radical change because right now in this situation, I've told you the impacts and
so let's talk about Alaska then, right? Was there any actual positive benefit economically from that study in Alaska?
Yes, surrounding businesses.
There's actually
object-
not.
I'm reading the study to you. Like the professor that oversaw it literally said that surrounding businesses saw increased sales as a result and hired more employees to handle the boom.
It
If
was actually
people-
found inconclusive, and I can send you the link for that later. But anyway, why would that work nationwide? It's all speculative.
Because we've seen the results in Alaska. We've
Which
seen
are
the results in
inconclusive.
Canada. Okay, fine. And I'll send you.
Computer has elapsed. Thank you, Senator. Speaker may be seated. Senator Kuwahara, is that a motion?
Yes, it is.
State that.
Right. So seeing as everybody's already given one speech, may I move to previous question?
No. 30 seconds.
Nay.
Because there are some seconds, we have to. Any objections? That's one. Any all who wish to move.
Motion to address the chamber.
Yeah, state that.
Okay. I mean, there's 10 people. There is no hard cap. There is like just only one bill. There's no reason why no one should like speak again if they can, right? Like, there's no hard cap.
I mean, since we seconded the motion, we still have to vote on it. But
I'm just saying, like, for everyone.
We can still take addresses to the chamber before we go on to voting. Senator Pasquarella, yeah.
I just want to add that, like, I understand wanting to get seconds.
You're cutting out. Could you repeat that?
Speech in because that's normally what we.
You're muted now.
Wait, did you hear me?
You cut out and then you accidentally muted yourself.
I don't know if I cut out.
Yeah, you did. So
okay.
Could you just repeat that?
Yeah, I was just saying it's just that like I think everything that can be said has already been said, so we really shouldn't be exhausting this debate just because we want to all get like 2 speeches in like we normally would.
Okay. Anyways, barring any more motions to address the chamber, will now vote on this motion. All who wish to move to previous question, raise your hand or placard. That's a vote of 9, and then all who oppose, the vote of 1. I'm sorry, Mr. Darman, you won't be able to get your second speech, but we're now in previous question. Sorry. Okay, we'll now be voting on this bill. All those who wish to pass this legislation, please raise your placard. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. All who wish to fail. That's 1, 2, 3. Wait, that's 1, 2, 3. And then any abstentions?
Oh, I meant to affirm. Sorry.
Okay, so then that was 5 to 3, right? We're still missing 2 votes. Did I count that wrong? There were. But even if there's 9, we still missed 1 vote, right? You know what? It doesn't matter. Okay. Either way, this bill still passes. Mike, congrats to the author. Are there any other motions on the floor? Senator Darman?
Seeing a natural break in debate, I motion to close the floor for debate.
Are there any seconds? Any objections? Seeing none, assuming unanimous consent, this round robin is now closed. Some last notes to the judges. Just a reminder, I didn't say this in the beginning, but I'm a tournament provided PO, so please don't rank me. And yeah, seeing as the round is over, congrats to everyone. We got through 10 speeches and questions, a certain number of questions that I don't want to count. Okay, guys, good luck tomorrow. And I'll be ending the meeting unless anyone else has something to say.
Yeah, before everyone goes, I just have some housekeeping. So for the stream, thank you to our sponsors, GCT Law Firm, Exploding Kittens, and Rocketbook. More on them in the coming days. And for all our competitors, amazing job. To our judges, thank you for being available on such short notice. We will have results done probably within this half hour and ballots emailed out to all of you by the end of the hour. So congratulations, everyone. I think everyone can leave the meeting at this point.
Thank you. Very nice job, and all of you. It's good to see you all, and good job.
Yeah, great job, everybody.
One last reminder to the judges, please don't rank me. I'm tournament provided.
Oh, you're getting rated.
What? Okay, anyways, see you guys. Good luck tomorrow. I'll be ending the meeting.
Thank you.